Hi, it's Kate Brownfield from ADHDkidscanthrive.com. I'm your host of the ADHD Kids Can Thrive podcast. I'm also an ADHD parent coach and author. Thank you for being here and thank you for all your support. My guest today is Cassie Korbfort. She is an early learning clinical coordinator for the Center of Developing Minds in Los Gatos, California. Please enjoy our conversation. Hi, Cassie. It's nice to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, so I asked you on the podcast because there's kind of what I feel like is a trend, or I'm hearing more stories about how what I like to call the littles, kids who are 2 years old to maybe 6, 7, 8, are showing up in school and their neurodiverse profiles may not be crystal clear and they're getting in trouble in schools, and parents are finding themselves at the preschool level having to advocate for a child when they don't really know exactly yet what's going on with their child as well. So you are an expert in this. So I'm so happy I found you and that we could talk about this today. So before we get started, I always love to hear from the person themselves, like kind of what is it? What's your expertise that you kind of are going to shine a light on for us today?
Mhm. My master's is in early childhood special education. I currently run the early learning clinic at the Center for Developing Minds, and I'm the creator of Diverse Minds, which is an online training program for early childhood and elementary educators and parents looking to learn more about developmental diversity.
Yeah. Okay.
And my world is the littles, like you said.
I know. I love the littles. It's such a sweet age, and it can be challenging if they're kind of not fitting into things like we wish as parents. Okay, so let's just start about like kind of what is going on here in 2025 with the state of neurodiverse children when it comes to them entering preschool and even elementary school.
It's a really tricky time right now because in any school system, whether it's the public school system or daycares, private schools, people are overworked and understaffed and undertrained. And when you're overworked, understaffed, and undertrained, it makes it really easy to understand why teachers are getting super frustrated with kids. If you have 20 kids in your class and one kid is constantly interrupting, constantly having meltdowns, it's hard not to get frustrated at that kid if you don't know what else to do.
Right. Okay, so what has changed since like the good old days, if you will? Like how did, neurodiversity, ADHD's on the rise, autism's on the rise. Like we didn't seem to have this many challenges for kids early on in their education. So what is changing?
Well, I think it's a few things. Yes, we're definitely seeing an increase in a lot of diagnoses, but I think we're also seeing teachers who want to support a wider profile of kids and don't necessarily know how to. So in the
Yeah.
past, when kids might have just been told to, sit down and be quiet, now we're getting teachers that are like, I want to help you actually be able to learn, not just blend in, but they don't have the answers yet. They didn't get the training.
Okay. Okay. So this is good for parents to know because you're going to probably be encountering teachers that are working with your kids who aren't specially trained, right? In neurodiversity and how to work
And,
with those kids. And
and
they don't have the
especially
bandwidth.
and in early childhood education, unfortunately, people don't get a lot of training in general. Especially if your kid's in a daycare, someone might be working there with 6 credits of early childhood education, which is, I mean, essentially nothing. So everything that they're learning is kind of from their community, from their current workplace. And so it does require parents a lot of the times having to really advocate for their kid.
Okay. Pretty quickly. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I was curious, has COVID played into this at all? Like this change of kids being behind or whatever the issue is in the classroom, right? I mean, even talking at like preschool and kindergarten level, like what is the role COVID is playing in all of this, if anything?
Well, right at first, a lot of teachers commented on how they needed to like reteach all of the basics of going to school. But in general, the kids who had attention issues before the pandemic, are still a similar profile of kids who have attention issues after the pandemic. The biggest difference, I would say, is just in the last few years, we've seen a huge influx of kids spending hours a day on media. And if your kid's spending hours a day on media, I mean, we have all kinds of studies now that show that it's harmful and kids are having developmental delays, difficulties with attention related to the media. And that around kind of pandemic time, we saw a big increase because
Yeah,
parents
and the screen
needed
time.
something.
Yeah. Okay, and just to put you on the spot, I don't know if you've digested that, but they said, kids overall, regardless if you have ADHD, reading levels and math skill levels are declining quite
And
dramatic.
speech is delayed.
Okay. And do you contribute that more to screen time versus COVID, lockdown from COVID?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anytime your kid is spending on a screen, they're spending not learning. And especially when it relates to attention. So much of attention is like delaying gratification. We all have like these impulses, and some kids have a harder time waiting to get those met. And
Yeah.
if you're used to watching a video where the screen changes constantly, you don't have to work very hard to pay attention to something. So if you're spending 4 hours a day on media, it's 4 hours a day that you weren't getting to practice delaying gratification even by a couple extra seconds.
Yeah. Okay. And then how does that affect your language?
Oh, hugely. I mean, if you're not getting practice in conversation, e even just turn taking, which is, again, it's a social skill, it's a communication skill, it's a delay and gratification skill, and if you're not practicing conversation, you're gonna struggle, you're gonna need more time to learn it.
Yeah. Okay. And then what about reading?
Oh, well, reading's the same thing.
Yeah.
In America, we have in a not perfect approach to reading in early childhood education. In some places in Europe, they don't even teach reading until you're 7. And here we have daycares now that are forcing 4-year-olds to be reading at a first grade level in the US even, which is rough. So reading's kind of a longer topic because
Yeah. Okay.
sometimes we're expecting kids to memorize letters and aren't necessarily working in a phonetic way that makes sense
Yeah.
for
To
acquiring
build
language.
on reading for long term. Yeah.
Yeah, so you get, the 4-year-olds that have memorized all 26 letters when they look at it, but don't really have any print awareness or understanding of what those are.
Yeah. Yeah. And comprehension is key too, people. So it's a process, right? That reading. I was just really struck because now they're saying reading overall is really affecting kids. They're not reading as well as they used to be able to.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start when a child, okay. So when a child gets in trouble at school, and we're talking preschool, kindergarten, first grade, okay, and the school is calling, like, what should a parent do?
It's a great question because usually when this first happens, the parents kind of have 2 responses. They first are like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know my kid did that. I've never seen them do that before." Or
Right.
they have the opposite where they're like, "Oh, no, I thought he was gonna be fine at school. Oh," and they're so worried about it. So, we have big feelings when we first get this call, but really what we need to do when we first get the call is tell teachers, "Thank you so much for telling me." Because we want them to keep giving us updates about anything that's going on at school. We don't want to hear after a month, "Hey, by the way, your kid's been pushing kids for a month." So anytime a teacher, administrator gives you feedback on your kid, even if it's negative, we want our first instinct to be, "Thank you so much for telling me." And then we want to go, "I absolutely want to work on this at home. Can you tell me more about when this happened?"
Okay.
So, because
Okay.
then again, knowing that teachers might not necessarily know the answer or may not necessarily have had the best response in that moment, you want to politely try and get some more information. And so you really can help your kid at home if needed. And then the last, you put the teacher politely on the spot and you go, "What has worked well at school that I could try helping my kid with at home?" Because if the teacher doesn't have a response to that, my goodness, then I really gotta help this teacher figure out how to work with my kid.
Right.
And if they have a response, great, you can go practice that at home.
Yeah. So it's really about the teaming up with the teacher,
Absolutely,
even
yeah.
if you don't want to,
Even if you don't want
and
to.
even if you're having big feelings about it or feeling exasperated.
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, you have to team up with the teacher and to kind of come up with a plan. Is it even possible to come up with a plan where the teacher isn't just calling and saying, like, what there's some pretty shameful things that come from educators during these times, I'm sure, because 'cause they're exasperated too.
Yeah.
So, kinda how does a parent work with the kid, or with the teacher to kinda create a strategy that isn't so everybody's reacting at these high levels
Yeah.
due to frustration and all of that? Like, how does the parent get there with their kid and their teacher?
Absolutely. We want to try and figure out why these things are happening when these things are happening. So if kid's not having any trouble during small group centers and is having a lot of trouble listening during whole group circle time, it's going to tell us some information about what their skill set currently is right now and how we can best address it. That's why you want to be on or you want to be on each other's team so you can get the most information to best respond to the situation.
Yeah,
The
okay.
teachers don't wanna be calling you every day either. It's a waste of their time, right? That's
Yeah,
nobody's enjoying that. The teacher's only doing that because, 1, they, need to be accountable for reporting anything, and 2, they're probably also hoping that the kid stops doing this.
yeah, exactly, but yeah, and get to the point. So, there's this little bit of this dynamic too where the school needs to document it and give the proper communication, but then at the same time, they are trying to walk the parent through the situation too, and it's
Yeah.
kind of this yin and yang, like, yes, your child did some bad behavior, but yes, they're gonna be able they're gonna stay in school, and we're gonna figure this out, right? There's, like, this weird dynamic that parents get into of addressing the immediate behavior, but then also I call it, like, the stroke jam, if you will, which is very confusing to parents when you're talking about your child, right? Because how do you kinda get to the root of the problem and kinda navigate this so there's a place for your child? I guess if your child is physically acting out, you have to handle that.
Mhm.
Everybody has to handle that right away, right? Because that's not okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some behavior things that are more immediate. Anytime a
Yeah,
kid's being hurt or hurting themselves, you gotta figure out something right away. But again, when it relates to impulses or attention, these are things that really do need to be worked on inside and outside of school.
right.
I actually at at my clinic, when I'm doing like a 1 hour social skills groups where often we do work on attention, I actually require that the parents stay and watch for that entire hour. I have cameras up in the clinic. I keep no secrets whatsoever. I want them to see exactly what's going on so that they can see how we respond and practice those skills at home as well.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think we can work in early childhood education and not work as a team. You
Yeah,
have to collaborate because there's so many hours of the day. And these are really functional life skills that cannot just be taught during 6 hours of daycare.
right, right. It has to be reinforced, too.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think it's very interesting when I was pre-talking to you or whatever, kind of like what is going on with this generation of parents on kind of how they are feeling about their kids and how they're kind of navigating kids who are struggling and having a hard time. What's kind of your observation of how parents are doing?
I kind of see two things right now. The first thing I see is the parents that are terrified of their kid struggling, terrified of their kid ever failing. I think I had mentioned this to you. I can't tell you the number of times I have kids come into the clinic and I say, "Can your kid put their shoes on?" And the parent says, "I don't know. I've never tried to let them do it by themselves." They've never given them the opportunity to struggle. And kids need to struggle. We want kids to reach, like, sometimes I refer to this as like mastery. We want kids to have lots of little wins, which means they struggle, they're successful. And then they know if they do another hard thing, they can struggle and be successful and they can keep this growth. And if we're protecting them from the struggle, they never get the win. They never learn that they can do hard things and they have no perseverance skills. So all of a sudden they get to kindergarten and the teacher's like, spell this 3-letter word. And the kid's like, no, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. and just gives up, melts down. We need to be preparing kids to do hard things, and that starts by us taking deep breaths and being okay with our kid not being happy with a challenging task.
Okay. So are parents guilty of giving in a little bit too soon?
Absolutely. It's hard to watch your kids struggle. One of the first things I do with a lot of families if they're coming in here for help with their kid is I make them sit back and watch their kid do a puzzle that's hard for the kid. Within
Okay.
their ability, but hard. And I tell the parent, "Don't say anything." And I watch these parents squirm. I mean, they have so much trouble not saying, "Turn it this way, put the piece there, it goes on top, do the outsides first," because they just don't want their kid to have that moment of hesitation of not knowing what to do. And
Okay.
anytime you're filling it in, you're robbing your kid. You're taking away a learning experience by not giving them the opportunity to learn.
Right. So we got to zip it, which is
Uh,
really hard for parents. I mean, I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. That's very difficult.
it's
It's a
super hard.
skill to learn.
And it's a really nice thing to want your kid to be successful, right? It's coming from a place that totally makes sense. But if you're protecting them at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're not setting them up for success at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, the rest of their life.
Right. It's like building. It's a Lego set, right? Step by step,
Yeah.
and to allow the kids to have that
And then I see the
struggle, right? Yeah.
yep. I see the parents that are kind of the opposite end of that too, where they're so focused on having your kid be successful at very specific things when they're young that they're having them spend so much time on things that aren't necessarily big picture things. You know, they're choosing to fight very specific battles. Like they need their kid to sit through the entirety of a 20-minute circle time, which isn't even necessarily
Yeah.
developmental appropriate anyways. And they're like, "That's what all the other kids are doing. I need you to be able to do it." And they're
Yeah.
focused on just that instead of focusing on just if your kid's attention span right now is 3 minutes, let's get to 4. Let's get to the next step instead of this one kind of overarching goal needing to be the next step.
Right. Which is stressful on kids too.
Yeah.
Right. So it goes back to this yin and yang of parents kind of finding that middle ground that's appropriate for their child.
And it's
Right.
hard to know what's appropriate to your for your child, right? You know, we can Google what do typical 4-year-olds do, but if you're not spending time around all the other kids, like walking out on the playground and seeing what all the other kids are doing, it's hard to know exactly what your kid should be doing. It is very enlightening to take your kid to the library or the playground and see what all the other kids are doing. It gives you an
Okay.
idea of what is generally expected.
That's
And
great advice. Okay. So if it's your first child,
oh, for sure if it's your first child.
right. And maybe if you have a child who's not, if your oldest or your older kids are typical or not neurodiverse,
Mhm.
that might be another good route to kind of see what's kind of more in line for a neurodiverse kid versus a typical kid. Yeah.
And I teach a parenting class, and one of the first things I teach in this kind of structured class is how to set expectations. How to know what is appropriate, customized for your kid.
Yeah.
And it is so important to figure that out so that we're setting our kids up for success. We're figuring out what we want our kids to achieve and then looking at all the tools that our kids need in order to help them be successful with that.
In their age group.
Not
Right.
even just in their age group though, but individualized to them, right? Because
Okay.
you can
Yeah.
have a 5-year-old and you Google what can 5-year-olds do, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for your 5-year-old.
Right.
I always say, let's go back to like the strengths that your kid has. So if we're talking about putting laundry away, that's going to look very different probably for a 14-year-old versus a 7-year-old versus a 2-year-old. So
Right.
you look at what the kid can do. If your kid can sort by color, great. Your 2-year-old is now sorting all of the laundry. If your kid can fold, great. Your kid's folding. But you're looking at what they can do to set the expectation. It'd be unreasonable if you just said, all right, hang up all the laundry, but you never taught your kid how to hang up all the laundry.
Right.
You got to
Right.
look at what they can do first.
Yeah. And then I had one educator tell me too, there is this other dynamic where kids are just so scheduled now.
Mhm.
They're not even given the opportunity to participate in the laundry, right? By the time they get home, they're exasperated, right? There's no gas in the tank. And so just skills like laundry, cleaning your room or whatever are just kind of being negated.
Yeah.
So that goes back to like, I guess, your value system as a family, right? And kind of recognizing that learning how to do the laundry is just as important as getting an A on a test, right?
The
Or whatever the things are going on.
the overscheduling really has a lot of negative impacts, actually. I mean, even just right back down to social skills. One of the most important thing in regard to social skills is understanding that everything has a beginning and a middle and an end. So your kid knows how to walk up to someone and say, "Come play," but then they don't know how to play. Or your kid can say, "All done," but they don't know how to tell when an interaction is all done. And so if all of their experience is, "Okay, I go to school and then I go to soccer," those are all adults telling you when everything is the beginning, the middle, and an end. You're not making any decisions. So if we don't have any
Oh,
of that open-ended time, we don't get practice using those skills.
interesting. Yeah.
And more importantly to me, boredom is absolutely essential for young kids.
Yeah.
Critical for kids to not have a task to do and need to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
And if we're so
Playtime,
scheduled,
right. Yeah.
they can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Not enough playtime for these kids.
Mhm.
And it's playtime means no screen time,
Absolutely. No
right?
screen
That's key.
time.
Screen time is not playtime. It's not, oh, yeah, it's not really helping them. Okay. So let's talk about, I think we talk like parents feel bad when their child struggles. I guess we kind of talked about that, right? Like, how does a parent kind of navigate their own feelings with
Well,
how do they separate their feelings from their child's feelings?
it's hard is the short answer, right? A lot of, adults are still thinking back to when they were young kids and how they felt growing up based off of whatever parenting strategy their parent did. And I'm seeing a lot parents that are just really well-intentioned, not wanting to see their kids struggle, fail, feel bad. Even when a kid is in emotional distress, they start going, "You didn't give me a turn." And our first instinct is to just solve the problem, tell them that they're gonna get a turn,
Yeah.
instead of working through the feelings that their kid is going through. We jump in and we solve these problems without giving kids the tools to solve the problems on their own. And again, one of the ways I really like to practice is just stepping back, being less involved, watching what our kid does. Then I start to comment. My next step with a lot of parents, I say, okay, now we're only going to comment on perseverance and effort. So you're not giving any tips on how to solve the task. You are only praising them continuing the task, persevering, following through. Sometimes we need like a little bit of an assignment. Like, okay, now
Yeah.
what can I do to help my kid be successful? Because the way I
Yes.
thought I could help my kid be successful was by telling them how to do it.
Right. Okay. That's good advice. I'm thinking of too, like with emotional dysregulation too, it's the same thing, right? It's just really trying not to go there with the kid when they're being dysregulated.
Yeah.
And it's a skill for the parent.
It is a hard skill to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a kid the other day in a group who was conflict with peer, and then he went, "Nobody's ever gonna wanna play with me again." And every adult's first response is, "Of course they're gonna wanna play with you again."
Yeah.
But what the kid needed to hear was, "Oh, I feel so bad that nobody wants to play with you right now." They needed you to go with them on the validation journey instead of just solving the problem, and in this case, disagreeing with the kid. Because
Yeah. Okay.
then the kid's gonna spend the whole time going, "Yes, they do. They're not gonna wanna play with me. They're so mean to me. I'm not gonna do this anymore." And now you're just in an argument with the kid who wasn't even arguing with you initially.
Yeah.
But if my first response is, "Oh, they're not gonna play with you. That's so frustrating." Now we're on the same team. I'm
Yeah.
in it with you together. We're going to process your feelings so that the kid gains the tools to process them himself long term.
Long term. Okay. And then tell me about the dynamic when parents, so if you have a neurodiverse child who may have impulse control, not sure how to navigate their emotions, which can be almost all kids, especially when they're younger.
Yeah.
But when the parents who don't have a neurodiverse kid come into the school setting with really strong opinions about what should be allowed and not allowed, how can a parent get on board with their neurodiverse kid and teacher to kind of help navigate, not be overpowered by those dynamics? Because that's a real thing that actually happens too. I guess what would be your tips for parents helping navigate that inside with the school?
Yeah, I see this a lot, unfortunately, especially in like charter school programs and private programs. Yeah, any parent that's putting their kid in one of their programs is someone who's, made a choice to choose this alternative school program because they feel it's best for their kid. And so if there's another kid who they deem to be interfering with what's best for their kid, some parents talk a lot to administration or the teachers to try and get that kid kicked out. Which again, whew, a lot of feelings about this. Feel really
Yes.
bad when your kid's being criticized. I mean, it's an awful feeling, right? Your kid needs to be in school too. And so what I always like to start with is just, again, assuring teacher we're on the same team. Whether you feel that internally the whole way or not, we're on the same team. I'm going to work with you because if the teacher feels you're working on things at home, they're a lot likely to say, or a lot less likely to say, all right, you're gone. And then you'll want to set really clear goals with the school. Like, what does my kid need to be able to do? Because if we're just trying to reduce hitting, man, maybe we don't care about my kid sitting down for 20 minutes at circle time. We care about meeting his needs so that he's not feeling like he has to act out
Act out, right.
to be successful. So when we can go back and focus on like what are the actual goals and priorities, it's a lot easier to work with the school and helping the kid be successful. If the goal
Okay.
is my kid transitions on time, there are lots of things I can do to help my kid work on transitioning. But if my goal is everything my 3-year-old does is perfect, it's a lot harder to achieve.
Right. Yep. So it is parents' advocacy. It takes a lot of advocacy work to kind of navigate these years. And your child will grow and mature and things maybe won't be so volatile, but it's clearly very important when they're young at this age to support the teacher and then support your child in the two places, right? So they can kind of grow and mature.
Yeah, I mean, a big part, I've worked with all ages before and up through adults through age 35 even. But I particularly love the young kids because you make a difference now and it just completely shifts the trajectory of
Yeah.
all of the next years of your life. If you're developing at this rate compared to your peers and we can shift it a little bit, all of a sudden, by 10 years old, you're way more successful because we put in extra work now when you're little.
Yeah. And it is easier when they're little. Even though it doesn't feel like it right now, it is easier, believe it or
So
not.
true. All of the behavior stuff, it's easier when they're small.
Yes. It feels overwhelming, but it's easier to handle it when they're younger so that they can kind of grow with their cup a little bit more full.
Yeah, and, if your kid's struggling with attention, when they're young, it a lot of times they know they're struggling at school, right? They pick up
Yeah.
on it, other kids know, they feel like they're the problem kid, and if, we wait years to address that, by that time, self-esteem is low too.
Yeah.
They
And then you
feel
got a
bad.
whole bunch of other problems. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, all kinds of other things, and so if we can have a positive mindset starting young age about trying our best, working hard to be successful, it makes a huge difference on kids' perseverance skills long term.
Yes. Okay. So this was really good too. So I'm thinking kind of as we wrap up, any of your words of wisdom, but also I'm getting a sense, I just want to make sure, like for parents who are struggling, they can reach out to resources like your program and stuff to help even team up with you and the teacher and the school to kind of build a plan around that. And we just stressed how important that is to do when they're little versus waiting, hoping it gets better, that, you can have a bigger impact earlier on, and that there's help, right? There's always help and access to resources to kind of help guide a parent on how to do this beyond just the school. And the school may need the help too, or a teacher. One particular teacher may need. I do a lot of podcasting too. Not every teacher is the same.
Yes.
Right? So some years may be a little bit more bumpy than other years.
Absolutely.
And it all just depends on what the teacher's expertise is, right?
Yeah.
And how wise they are, or what kind of education they've had, what they've learned over the years, and that kind of thing. Okay. So as we wrap up, what would be kind of your words of wisdom for parents with their littles who are struggling at home and school?
My last piece of advice is that kids can do hard things if we let them. We want to give kids the opportunity to struggle and fail towards reaching success. If we don't give kids these little moments of struggle and failure, they're never going to be successful at big long-term things.
Yeah.
You have to give kids the opportunity to do hard things.
And I think the key word you said is little things.
Yes, at first.
I think that's the key. So the big things is like a whole nother thing, but the little tiny daily things, let them have that struggle and learn through their own struggle.
Yes, absolutely.
It's okay for that to happen. Yeah, it's good. I love that. Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining me today. This was my pleasure and an honor to talk to you.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.